This is Breaking Down Security, and I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Vetcher for Breaking Down Security.
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not much. How are you doing at DEF CON?
DEF CON is great. I'm meeting all kinds of people, and yeah.
Nice.
It's awesome. Security folks. Yeah. Lots of hackers here, though.
Oh,
What's
yeah?
up?
Yes, I appreciate the stories you're telling me about those generic things that happened to you there this week. So that's very nice, especially that one about that guy who did the thing.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. So, well, let's hope you have safe travels coming back, and we'll have a real report next week to discuss how you did at B-Sides and Black Hat, and you went to all of them, right? All the cons, the Black Hats and the B-Sides, and
yeah, I went to all of them, man.
Okay, well, awesome. All right, so I'm
actually on the plane right now.
Well,
flying back.
That is probably a true statement, actually. Yeah. So this week, after last week's massive success with Mimikatz, I hope, we are going to backtrack a little bit. So we did a podcast just after Mr. Vetcher got back from the Austin DFIR conference, and some of the things that we said, we got some feedback on. So we thought we would, discuss a little more in depth about that. And one of the people who reached out to us, ironically enough, his name was Brian as well. His name is Brian Ventura, and we'd like to welcome Mr. Ventura to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. So, first, if we could, before we get into our discussion of all things the DFIR, give us a little bit about your background, a little bit of your history, your origin story, where you came from, how you got to be in information security, that kind of thing.
All right. Well, I've been in information technology for a long time, so early 90s, and started at college, got very interested in Unix operating systems specifically, and started following a path of Unix administration and Windows administration and the integration of those two working together. And along the way, I always would do extra things that ended up being security related, but I didn't have it as a title. It was just something I was doing. So there was a firewall involved, or there was routing, or something that was security related. How do you secure the systems to make sure they're not getting attacked? Those kinds of things. And I did a lot of consulting work. I was actually in Austin, Texas for most of this. And I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2009 and been up here the rest of the time. And most recently, I became officially a security architect. And so I've been doing that for a few years. And on the side, I also teach for SANS at the community level. I teach the critical security controls. And I have a class coming up in the end of September in Long Beach, California. So that should be exciting and fun. But I also just recently went through the 508 course, as did Mr. Vetcher, and have a little bit of a different view of it. And I can talk about incident response and some digital forensics and how those two come together.
Okay. So one of the things that Mr. Vetcher had said on the podcast was that you don't really need, in an incident response, you don't always need digital forensics. Am I getting that right, Mr. Vetcher?
Well, I basically said that there was a gap in the training that was the incident response portion, where they didn't really cover that much. I mean, in the corporate world, when you do have a potential incident, that's when you instigate your incident response or your incident response plan. And so you look at the live systems, try and figure out and contain the what is perceived to be an incident, and once you figure out what's going on, clean it up, that sort of thing. And that's the kind of thing, the incident response piece, that was lacking in the course. they jumped right into forensics, kind of meaning I guess the law enforcement, realm of incident response, where your incident response is probably where a police officer goes to a perp's house and determines a couple of things. Is the computer on? If it is, call a forensics expert. If it's off, well, then you can tag it and bag it for evidence and take it to the station. That's the type of incident response, and then it goes right into forensics at that point. So there wasn't much or any incident response in the advanced incident response and digital forensics course, in my opinion. So
okay,
that was what I said, and my opinion was that there's that gap between, we may have an incident and start putting, hard drives in bags and getting ready to spend the effort in, trying to determine what happened with the hard drives.
Okay.
And I had a little bit of a different view, but I see your point that there was a good portion of the course, probably 3 or 4 of the days, were working on images and memory forensics and disk forensics to really get that information and reap the information from the systems that you found. But I would say that the first part of the class and the last part of the class did cover some of what you feel is missing. The incident response side, they talked about how to connect to a number of systems across your network using F-Response was the tool that we used, but the idea that you could connect to them and pull information to determine where you might have an infection or you might have where the breach might be coming from. And then towards the end of the class, they talked specifically about hunting, looking for anomalies and trying to use threat intelligence and find breaches that you don't know about yet, which is a form of incident response. My big take of incident response is, you're right, there is a big process that has a command group and a communication group and how those work together. And that wasn't really expressed deeply in the class, but they suggested that you would have that, and then this is how digital forensics works inside of that bigger process.
Okay, so is the idea, so is this like a red team, blue team thing? It's like, okay, incident response is kind of the boring stuff that we don't really need to, we don't want to deal with because that's the boring stuff, when in fact we want to do all the cool, pulling artifacts off of a hard drive, or, taking this, mobile device and, running the image, or, here's some hardware that does write blocking so that you can pull proper images off a hard drive without, messing up the chain of custody and, that kind of stuff. Are we seeing that in the DFIR realm of the red team, blue team thing, where it's more sexy to do the digital forensic stuff and pulling things out of memory?
I wouldn't say that that's where it is. I would say that, yes, there's this process side of creating your incident response plan that might not be as sexy as actually doing forensics. But the incident is going to come in a weird way. Typically, it's going to be something like, hey, an IPS just said you have a computer that's talking to command and control, mm-hmm. or Brian Krebs called you and said that your data is on the dark web, and then you're left with, okay, I'm going to start an incident. I'm going to go through all my proper communications. Now I got all my incidents set up. I'm ready. I got my team. What are we going to do? Where are we looking for this? And that's where the digital forensics comes in, to be able to look at your systems and find where the actual breach is occurring. Where is the bad guy living inside your network? And one of the big surprises is it's probably not just the one machine that pinged the IPS. It's probably systemic and across a number of your systems. And in your podcast previously, Mr. Betcher talked about his WebMD, and I think that is a great digital forensics tool to use an artifact called the Windows logs to find where bad things have happened. And it's one of many tools that you would use in forensics to get to what system is the core system that they started with and where did they spread. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So throughout the course, we learned how to gather certain artifacts through whatever means. I mean, we went through probably 100 different apps, right? Learning what this app did and this one, and a lot of that was in volatility. There were Python scripts in the SIFT workstation that we were given, right? And time after time, I kept saying, well, it's in the logs. You don't need that. It's in the logs. You know, if you set your logging properly, you have all that, and you don't have to do log to timeline or the super timeline. If you just set your logging properly, you're going to have all that anyway, right? So that I had I kept saying in my mind, well, if you just had the logs, you wouldn't need all this other stuff, right? Unless the logging wasn't set properly, which in a corporation, if you're able to get a good incident response team going and you're able to set all the logs in your environment, then you don't have any assets that you would need to take a disk image of, in theory, right? And it would all be there in the logs. You would only have to be looking for, something that you didn't account for that may be there where you might have to do a disk image, but that would be very rare.
So let me ask a question. So you guys brought up the timeline and the super timeline. Maybe one of you could explain what the timeline is and what the super timeline is.
Brian, go for it. I haven't taken the test
I'll try.
yet. So
we'll see what I can do. Both of them are tools that you would run that give you basically an Excel spreadsheet with lots of information. They go after different pieces of information, but the goal is to find out all the things that have happened on this computer over a given time period. And there's lots of places to find that information. The event logs are one of them. Another one is every time you execute a program in Windows, it creates a prefetch file, which is just a link on your hard drive. And then there's the registry puts an entry in different areas when things are executed. You're pulling all that information out so that you can hopefully start seeing when things happened. And if you have an indicator of some sort, like that the person downloaded the malware and it was called 123, then you can search through the timeline for when the download of 123 happened, and then you look around that area 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after to see how did they download it, and then how did it execute, and what else did it do. And so that's how you use the timeline. But it's gathering information from the registry, from the file system, timestamps on the files, from the event logs, etc.
So it's trying to reconstruct like the crime scene in this case.
Yeah, or the specifically the timeline of the crime, who drove in and then who drove away, who was watching out their window, whatever those things, who shot first, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay.
And so with the logs, if you set those things properly, if you look at prefetch, for example, is a great indicator of what executed when. You also have the the 4688 events, which is process create, right? So our process execution. You can also have your PowerShell execution as well in the 500 and the 4104 log events. So and then all of that is chronological as well.
So I have good questions about that. You said that you have all this stuff in your logs, and I think that's great. First off, I don't, so I need your help with that. So I'm interested in finding out about that. The two things that I see that the logs may fail you is you might be able to find when something happened, but then you don't know exactly what it did, where if you can get to the disk and pull out deleted files of the actual malware, that might be useful. And then the second thing is, are you storing the logs only on the machine? And as a bad guy, could I have cleared the logs after I was done doing malicious activities?
Okay, so I'll address that in reverse order. The bad guys can delete logs, but that's great. You can alert on that event. It creates a log event in and of itself. So whenever you see that somebody cleared the logs, that's a Sev 1 right there.
But
If
you got to
do
get it
have,
off the system, right? You got to
that's
get
right.
those
You
logs
got to
off the
have
system.
a log forwarder like a Windows logging service, Splunk, whatever SIEM you have, forwarding those log events to something offline, right? So you have to have that.
What keeps a bad guy from turning off the Windows logging service if he has a reason to believe that there might be a SIM or something on the network?
Well, he would have to have elevated privileges right away. So before he did anything, right, on the system. Otherwise, once he elevates his privilege or whatever, you can alert on those events as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Or whatever execution happens on that. And then another thing you asked is how do you get these particular events in the logs? That's a great question. All you have to do is download LogMD and run it on your system, and it'll tell you exactly what you haven't set in order to get the right data out of the logs. Because LogMD isn't going to tell you anything if you don't set the logs properly, and it's going to basically barf on the screen and say, hey, you need to set this, this, and this, and it'll give you a report. There's also the Windows logging cheat sheets that you can get at Malware Archaeology. That has even more settings that we found, and if you follow that, you can catch things like Mimikatz, right, in the 4673 events where you see those SE TCB privilege elevation, right, and that gets spit out in the logs as well. And so if you follow the Windows logging cheat sheets, there's also the PowerShell logging cheat sheets where you can catch the super secret PowerShell hackery, right, in the logs themselves. That's a great resource for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep going back to it, but what was the difference between a timeline and a super timeline? Is super timeline just like the overall, like from beginning to end, and timeline is just like from infection to we found out about it? How's the super timeline and the timeline different?
Super Timeline brought in a little bit more information, and I believe one of the key points was that Super Timeline grabbed the event logs themselves, and Log to Timeline wasn't grabbing some of that information, but it's just different. Super Timeline was a bigger group of information that it was bringing in.
Yeah, it could bring them in from the memory forensics and from other artifacts, whereas the Log to Timeline maybe just did log events. I'd have to rehash.
I think it did the registry and the file system timestamps and those things, where the Super Timeline could bring in the memory and the extra information. So
this is in terminology. These are like applications then?
The volatility has the Log to Timeline built into it, and then the Super Timeline is a Python script that's a little more powerful, but they're very similar.
Okay, I thought they were like, DFIR terminology you guys use, like, oh, here's the timeline, or here's Okay, so those are.
Well, it sort of is, but yeah, it's like a script somebody wrote, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm looking at the 508 things that you're supposed to learn in the class, and it seems like there's a lot. It's kind of all over the place. I mean, you talk about threat intelligence, which I don't know how digital forensics helps with that. Maybe you guys could shed some light on that for me. I mean, it talks about understanding the kill chain, which we've mentioned a few times on the podcast. But how is threat intelligence help you with digital forensics? I mean, I can understand the incident response level. I mean, if you can set your IPS stuff, but
yeah, that's the incident response stuff. If I don't know that I have an incident, how do I know I have an incident? Is it Brian Krebs calling me and it's already over and done with, or is it that I can get my threat intelligence, search for something, put it into my IPS so that I can find my own incidents? And I think that's a key differentiator with the logs, is the logs are really awesome at alerting, if you could build those alerts in to find a problem as it occurs. And then incident response assumes that you didn't find it initially, and now you're dealing with the aftermath of it, or you found out at some point along the breach, the incident, and you may not be at the beginning of the incident. You may be finding it towards the end or in the middle, and you have to start looking into it to find out where in this kill chain or where within this breach am I? Am I totally lost, or am I in a place where I actually can contain it prior to data exfiltration or theft of intellectual property, whatever you're looking at as the end goal of the attack.
So would you say incident response is everything prior to containment, and then forensics comes after containment?
No, I would say that incident response is the whole process, and then digital forensics is a tool you use to feed information into the different phases of the incident response. Because incident response has I'm going to get them wrong, but you have your 5 or 6 phases of your incident response. So you have to identify where the problem is, and you want to identify all of it instead of, hey, my malware defense alerted me that this one machine's infected, so I'm going to go ahead and contain that by re-imaging that machine. You haven't really identified the whole incident. So you really need to start looking at, well, we know one machine is infected. Let's look for other machines. Let's not turn that one off yet. Let's not disconnect it, because if we do that, the bad guys now know we found them. So let's keep looking, and we'll just watch what that system does. And we'll look at who connects, where did that system connect to, and who else connected to the same websites that computer connected to, because maybe that's how they got the malware. I have a really good example. We had an incident with ransomware. We've had a few, and we had an incident. One of the incidents we sent off for deep forensics to an outside organization, and we did our part to contain it, to restore from it. Our backups and restore procedure saved us. We were back in operations in a few hours, basically, and within the same day we were up and running. We lost 24 hours worth of data in a single or 2 file shares, but we thought we were good. And the report came back from the digital forensics, and we learned that in addition to the ransomware, there were 7 other pieces of malware on the machine. And one of those pieces of malware was a keylogger. So there was the potential in this incident that the person's password was known due to the keylogger, and the time between our containment and the digital forensics report that we got could have been an exposure of that person's password being available and usable by the bad guys. We had a little bit of luck in this one. The person told us their password during the incident, and so we changed the password, because if we know your password, then if you ever tell anybody your password and we find out, we want to change your password. So we ended up being covered by it, but it was an eye-opener to us that we had something that we thought was simple. We have ransomware. We know how to fix ransomware. We contained it, and we luckily contained everything, but we didn't contain everything because there were through our process, because there was this keylogger that could have exposed more things.
Okay, so in that case, so you did mention the 5 or 6 phases. So there's preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. So I mean,
yeah, lessons learned are important.
Well, obviously, but I mean, it's considered part of the incident response. So when do you actually say we're done? I mean, is that after the lessons learned? You're like, okay, here's the meeting, and so how long does an incident response go before it becomes something more? Because in ITIL you hear about problem management, you hear about incident management, and when does an incident become a problem? Is that when it's persistent and you don't really know the scope of it? Because identification, that section of incident responses, you're supposed to be able to scope how embedded something is or how bad something is. When does the incident response actually end in this case?
Yeah, and that's the thing that keeps me up at night. So we have, in my ransomware example, we got through our identification phase pretty quick, because we said, oh, it's ransomware, and we looked on the network and saw that all the places that this machine connected to. So we've identified all the file servers that got encrypted, and we know this machine was encrypted, and we know that this machine didn't talk to any other workstations. So we know that we've got it contained. And so we finished that phase and we moved on and we did our thing. We unplugged it from the network. We actually took images because we want to practice our digital forensics, get better at it so that we have that as a tool. So that's what we did. But we were just doing it for the learning something and not necessarily because we felt that the incident needed it. And that's where we got surprised and we moved through our phases. But what I worry about are those big incidents where you find out about companies that have been owned for 9 months or 3 years, and to clean up one of those incidents may take months or years because you can't turn off the network and fix it all. And so if you don't do it properly, you would start doing whack-a-mole, and the bad guys just get smarter along the way. So you have to really spend a lot of time in that identification phase and try to be really smart about your containment such that you're not indicating that you know the bad guy's there. Because the reality is when you come into an incident, you're probably not there day one. You're probably not there in the first hour of the incident. You're probably halfway through the incident or after the data exfiltration. So stopping it in the moment, as soon as you find out about it, probably won't stop the breach of data because it's already happened. So
that's
therefore,
right.
You should take your time and say, okay, I know this is infected. I know there's bad guys. Maybe you see them, logically typing on the keyboard. You see that they're doing stuff. Even though you know that they're doing stuff, you probably shouldn't stop them. You should watch and then be smart about it and say, hey, wait a minute, they're close to my PCI data. That's my crown jewels. Let's divert them in a way. Make it look like it's a laptop and it moved networks. Maybe I can do that. Something that they still have access to the system, but they no longer have access to those crown jewels. And I'm just using PCI as an example. But you watch them, hopefully they don't think you actually stopped them or learned about them. They just think, oh, something happened. The user rebooted their computer because they were having a glitch, or they moved their laptop to the wireless network because they're going to a meeting in another room, and that's probably what happened. And that way it gives you time to watch, but you're not worried about your crown jewels getting taken away.
And typically the good hackers they'll compromise a machine, but they won't use that machine to do any real hackery. They'll use that to jump over to another system, and then they probably won't use patient zero again unless that's their last resort, right? Because they want to keep that back door and not let it be known.
Or have multiple backdoors. So as they move along, they infect two machines. One becomes a dormant backdoor, and one becomes an active exfiltration device. Or send everything from the 20 machines that I own back through one machine to go out, so that it looks like only one machine is doing all the work, but really there's 20 machines feeding that one. So you really have to think about it as, if your business, if your job, your team's job was to break into these places and steal all their data, break into Coke and get the formula for Coke, I don't know, whatever that is, you're going to take a methodical approach to it. You're going to take your time. You're going to plan it. You're going to have teams that work on specific things. You're going to have the penetration team, and you're going to have the keep access team, and the look around and do your reconnaissance team. And they're all going to be working. It's not just one lone actor in his parents' basement hacking along, and once you knock him off, he's like, oh, I guess I got to go to bed now. It's 2 a.m, and I'll look for another target tomorrow. I'm done with them. It's really, you got to think about it as more of an organized attack.
So if you were talking about scoping, like how much of your network is involved, if you're following proper network design, there's a lot you can do to limit the spread of a malware or ransomware or something like that, right? I mean, it really depends on the scope. I mean, Mr. Betcher, has told me that he's had ransomware incidents where he works. Where he, and they're typically, Mr. Beck, they're like one-offs, right? Like you get an email from a guy, hey, I clicked on this link, and you're like, okay, yeah, he's definitely got malware, because of how certain the networks are set up, or maybe this guy works remotely. The scope is almost immediately, well, it's just that one box, because he hasn't done anything other than get his own box infected. Can having proper network design or proper controls in place, like for instance the class you're teaching, the SANS top 20 controls, having those controls in place, will that help reduce the chances of one having an incident response in the first place, or in the event of an incident response, it's actually lessened?
Yes, and that's absolutely true. That the critical security controls, as an example, the first 18 of them don't have anything to do with incident response necessarily, besides that one of them talks about, hey, you should have logs, and all of them kind of say you should send your logs somewhere. But the specific number 19 is incident response. So, it's a ways down there, but it's still, so there's lots we could do to protect our networks, to detect on our networks, so that we don't have to do incident response. But incident response will inevitably happen, and ransomware is a great example. And we were dealing with it in the way that you talked about. Well, it's probably pretty isolated. We have really good network tools. We see that this workstation obviously talked to the file server and started encrypting at 4 o'clock today, and it's now 6 o'clock. So let's look at 1 hour before that and up until now. Let's see what that workstation talked to. We see that it didn't do anything malicious until 4 o'clock. We see the download just before 4 o'clock. We see that it talked to these 3 machines but no others. So we feel like we have good containment of this machine and the file servers that they talk to. And that's reasonable, but it's part of our incident response to do that, to go through those steps. And then what are we going to do now that we've had ransomware? We've talked about, well, what controls are we going to put in place to stop it next time? And critical control 1 and 2, know all the systems on your network and have an inventory of the software and use software whitelisting could be the solution to stop all ransomware. If it's not on my authorized software list, you can't run it. And that could probably stop most of the ransomware that's out there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, prevention and detection controls, network segmentation, very important.
Yeah. So if you have seen or heard of let's say somebody's like, oh, I got hit with, what was that one I got called? Lumpy. I think there was one I got from the InfraGard folks. It was like, oh, it's a piece of malware. If the malware is already fairly well known, is there a reason to go through the entire step of containment and eradication? And if the easiest method is just take 15 minutes and reimage a box, and you already know that it's going to be contained to one box, is there a reason to even start a analysis and all that, hold on to images and things like that for the future? Can you streamline the process once that you've or refine the process once you realize that your people are getting hit by the same thing? It's just a matter of training them not to click on a link. Is there a way to streamline the incident response once it's become pretty much commonplace that you're getting owned by this one piece of malware?
Somewhat, because as long as you go through the right steps. So for us, we look at our network stack. That's where we're starting to do our digital forensics, is look at what went on the network in those 3-hour window that I used as my example. And we've done enough identification to be comfortable with that, and then we can wipe it. But I hesitate to do that every time, because my example of, hey, as a learning tool, we want to take an image and actually be able to find the malware on the hard drive image and in the running memory. And just to practice this, we ended up finding 7 additional pieces of malware that our anti-malware didn't find, that we didn't know about, because the only reason why we knew about an incident was because it was, I believe it was cryptXXX in this example, and it was encrypting files. So that's how we found out about it, and that's what we went after. That's what we cleaned up. Is we knew we cleaned up crypto ransomware, but then there's 7 other pieces of malware that were doing completely different things, including a keylogger. So that's where it was an eye-opening experience that, hey, we might need to do more with this. We need to do more investigations and understand fully what's going on in here. So in my example, probably the lesson learned is the person that got infected, let's assume they had a keylogger on there, and so let's change their password as well, and let's monitor their account to see if it gets logged into or failed login attempts from a bunch of areas. And that is what we implemented in this one. So that was a good example. And since we looked at the network, we feel like those other 6 pieces of malware, one was a keylogger, one was a crypto ransomware, the other 6, they didn't do anything on our network that we can identify. Besides, one was a downloader, by the way. That's how the rest of them got there. And we see that traffic, so then we can use those indicators of compromise of what this system did, but we feel that we've got good containment by re-imaging the machine, restoring all of our files, and changing the affected user's passwords. We actually changed all the passwords that for all the accounts that were on that machine, which included some service accounts, because we don't know if during that period one of our services logged in and did something, and then that account is a service account that might exist somewhere else. So we did that as well.
And I've seen malware that has many capabilities. Trojans. They're capable of encrypting all your files on your machine, but they're also capable of acting like a Trojan and just doing whatever, listening to your mic, watching video through your camera, key logging, all kinds of things. So they're really well-rounded pieces of malware that can do a lot of things. So you've seen the hospitals that they had multiple machines encrypted. Well, that was a Trojan that was placed on all the different machines that had the capability of propagating at, whenever, the attacker would find another machine and be able to get access to it, put the Trojan on, and then they would talk to each other. And then when the button was pushed to encrypt, it would encrypt all of them at the same time. And then they have the capability of housing themselves only in memory. They call the Microsoft crypto libraries not to encrypt things sometimes, but to use the random number generator so they can change their hash and the name of the file that gets placed on disk when you reboot each time. So, a lot of different capabilities. These things are pretty advanced.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian, what you guys were talking about seems to be quite time consuming. I mean, a lot of companies, their IT department is stretched thin already. So, I mean, how long, I mean, I guess it depends on the scope or whatever, or have you, if you've seen this, but I mean, at what point do you find the time to do the investigation and all that stuff? I mean, if your job is to make money and you don't want to, if you need to do the needful thing, which is to keep your company running, if your salesperson got infected and your salesperson needs his laptop back now, I mean, how long do you spend working on the salesperson's laptop before you go like, oh, screw it, I'm going to just image his box and give it back to him? I mean, how long? I mean, your management doesn't, they just want it fixed. So, I mean.
Yeah. And that's where your incident response plan comes into effect. So we assume that none of us are infected right now. So what are we going to do for that infection that we're going to have, that incident that we're going to have 6 months from now? Let's plan for that. What will we do? Hey, management, how much are you willing to spend on this? What's really the risk? So if we get infected with something where they're actually trying to steal my corporate assets, what could they get? And so you have that conversation with your business, and your business says, wow, they could put us out of business, that they could do millions of dollars worth of damage. You say, okay, great. They could do millions of dollars worth of damage. How much are we going to allocate for recovering from the potential of millions of dollars of damage, and you start talking about those budgets and those plans. I would argue that small, medium, and even some of the smaller large companies, so large companies that are less than 10,000 people, probably need, and I'm just pulling that number, probably need to engage with an incident response company and get a contract with them that says they'll put feet on the ground, they'll help us with this, they're going to come in this much time, and they're going to do all that work. And to your example of the laptop, maybe you have a plan that we're going to have 2 laptops on the side that no one ever uses, so that when the salesperson gets infected, we can just hand them a laptop, change their password, cross our fingers, and work on this laptop, but think that that salesperson is safe. But you come up with that plan now while we're not going through an incident, so that we're ready for it in our incident.
And it could be the case where you have to take the company off the internet for a time, just because you're either at risk for exfiltration, right? Or you see that hackers have keys to the kingdom, and you need to stop it in its tracks, and for a few hours, so that you can find out, okay, which machines are compromised and which aren't. And you need to have those conversations with your network team, with management, and say, how long can we afford to be offline, A, and B, can we actually take our systems offline? Is there a procedure for the network guys to say, okay, I'm gonna make these changes, and that's going to get us off the internet, right? Sometimes you may have that conversation, and the network engineers might say, I have no idea how to take us offline. Give me a week and I'll find out, but I really don't know.
Yeah, we're all cloud services. There's no taking us offline. We're all out there.
Right. And you got to figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the point is start your incident response plan today and figure out all those things, how it would impact your company, what your organization can do about this, and what they're prepared to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So before we move on, the one of the last things I want to ask is from both of you, if somebody is going to take the 508 class, and since both of you did take it at the same time, well, you guys must have been in the same classroom together, right?
No, I think I took it in March.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what should they expect to get out of the course when they go in? And if they're expecting, I don't know, should they already be a seasoned incident response person or a seasoned digital forensic person? Should they have been doing this stuff before, and then they're just going in to get a certification to show that they actually know what they're talking about?
I think that there's prerequisites on the site. So if you go to SAN's website, there are prerequisites, and you're definitely going to need those prerequisites. There's some of the course that was over my head. For instance, I'm not a programmer, so I'm not going to be able to take a piece of malware and figure out what the malware actually does at a programming level. And that wasn't specifically in the course, but that's one of the follow-on courses, so they talked about it. But then I have a lot of system experience. I understand the Windows operating systems reasonably to come into this course. The 408 course is a prerequisite for it, and the 408 course talks about all the artifacts you can find on a system. Think about, if I took your computer, could I read all your Skype messages and find out where all your emails are and what your browsing history is, just because I have an image of your hard drive, or maybe I'm connecting remotely maliciously and I can see all this data. So it's more about those artifacts you get off the system, and that's something that is very useful when you start thinking about creating timelines and searching for malware and trying to find where things are hiding in an operating system. So those are definite prerequisites. It is an advanced course. SANS has their 300 series, 400 series, 500 series, 600 series, and it is 500 is the advanced level.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah. And I think that Mr. Betcher mentioned that it's like drinking from a fire hose, right? And I'm going to concur with that one. That one was definitely a lot of information fast. So it was a good class.
Yeah, it was. I enjoyed it, and I'm one of those that think that SANS does a great job of building the course out. Right, it has great notes, great handouts, and great labs. I also did the Net Wars. That was fun. I don't know if you did that, Brian.
Yeah, I've done both of them, but I did the DFIR one, and I was surprised what I could do in the DFIR one at this course. So yeah, it was eye-opening.
Cool.
So I want to address the other question you asked. I forgot to answer it, but you said, how do you capture that malware? We can't really capture it on the fly, just a normal system right now, but I am working on incorporating that into LogMD in the future. Antivirus can capture it, right? So if they get a particular file with a hash that's identified as a virus, what antivirus does is capture that before it runs, right? Yeah. Before it executes and quarantines it. So that, you have to be able to do that somehow. So I'm going to figure that out and try and get that going. And then you can audit certain directories for execution. Like, for example, user space. You shouldn't ever have anything execute in user space. App data local temp. It's a temp directory for data, right? App data. You have to place, you can place data there, but don't execute from there, right? So anything that executes in those directories, you need to know about it. So log for it, alert on it, anything that executes in user space. That's what the program files, right? The program directories are for. They're for programs. User space is not for programs, right? So that's a red flag there. Look for things like that.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. So I want to spend a couple of minutes because you are teaching the SEC 566 course about it's no longer, it's not the SANS top 20 controls anymore. They're called the cyber, no, not even. They're owned by
Center for Internet Security is who has it.
Yeah, that's
Center for Internet Security, and they're the critical security controls.
Okay, so this week they're called the Center for Internet Security. Next week they'll be called the Uber something something something. So
I'm hoping not, but yeah, it's possible.
Okay, so this is a 500 level course too.
Yeah. So this one goes over all the controls that you should have in your organization that are technical controls. So there's a lot of information that comes across for all these different controls. There's many things you can do for prevention, detection, and it's just a lot of information. So yeah, it's a 500 level course. There is a 400 level version of it that's a 2-day version of it. Mm-hmm. And one of the comments that I typically get out of the 2-day version is, wow, it'd be nice to have more time and talk about the tools that you would use and talk about how you might implement these things. And I always have fun talking to people and say, yeah, we agree with that. You do need a lot of time to talk about this stuff because there's a lot there. So, and that's what the 5-day course is. So I'll be teaching it again in Long Beach. It's September 26th through the 30th, I believe.
Okay.
And you can find the course on SANS website, the sans.org/instructor/Brian-Ventura, and you'd find my site, which only has the one course. I'm taking the rest of the year off and teaching locally through the community college, so I can't travel, and CISSP course just to have it available to the local Portland community. Mm-hmm. So I'm not able to do any more SANS courses for the rest of the year, but then I'll start up again in January and teach. I teach the 566 course and the 440 course, which are the critical security controls, and I'll be taking on the 401 course, which is the information security boot camp. So
okay.
It goes over a lot of stuff there.
So what's the difference between a SANS community course and like a SANS course?
So SANS has a few different ways that they teach, and the community level is where they do one course in a city. So I'll be teaching, and it'll be the only course that's going on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not conventions. The other level where they have many courses, they might have 5. Portland has coming up next month, and Seattle has it in September. They've got the SANS Portland and SANS Seattle, and there's 5 courses in Portland, 6 in Seattle. And then they have the big conferences that like the Las Vegas, and I was in Orlando. There were 53 courses going on in Orlando.
Holy cow. Yeah, that was SANS Fire or something, right? Or is that something different?
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was, but it's one of those, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we tried to do the top 20, SANS top 20 at the time. It was like version 5 or something, and we started at the wrong end of the spectrum. We should have started with number 1 and went to 20, but we went 20 to 1 because I thought, it's like, counting down the top 20 hits, whatever.
It gets more exciting as you get down there.
Yeah, and then I messed up. And Mr. Betcher, what were we like number 15? He was like, hey, we're supposed to do these in the opposite order. And I was like, oh, God, you're killing me.
And by the time we got to 10, they changed the order. So
they did. I know.
Like, we were outdated at that point.
Yeah, because version 6, it was like, number 18 is now number 8, and number 5 is number 13. I'm like, well, we can't start over because that's So I was like, well, screw it. We can't do the last 10. So, so, it's interesting because we were talking before the show, but when we had Jared on, we did the podcast on the questions you should ask when you're scheduling a pen test. And I think that the security controls, the top 20 security controls, the first 19 are probably the things you should also do even before you decide you want to do a pen test. Because number 20 on the top 20 security controls is get yourself a pen test.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, not just, making sure that you're doing the scoping and everything, but you need to make sure that your house is in the right order before you even decide you want to do this. Because one, it will make the pen test a lot more difficult for the pen tester. They don't just walk up in there and steal your stuff like, a bad guy would.
Yeah. Yeah. So control 4 is do a vulnerability assessment and manage your vulnerabilities. If you do, some pen testers will just do a vulnerability assessment, and they'll give you this report that says, hey, look, your Microsoft this is out of date, and your Adobe Flash is out of date, and I totally got in by doing that. And then you say, well, wait a minute, I have a vulnerability assessment scanner. Why didn't I just run that myself? I could have got that information.
Exactly.
So, yeah, you definitely want to do some of these controls, and it will make it much harder for that penetration tester. And the information you get out of that penetration test will be real gold, because that's going to be real hard to get attacks versus just the easy ones of, hey, your Flash hasn't been updated for 2 years. There's a million bugs in it.
Yeah.
Or Heartbleed is still on your system. Well, hopefully we've all fixed Heartbleed by now. I wish I would have fixed it before the pen tester got here.
Very cool. So that's if you want to do that, it's going to be at the Courtyard, Long Beach downtown, 500 East 1st Street in Long Beach. If you want to do the top 20 security controls, there's a link in our show notes to the where you can sign up for it. Should be good times. Hopefully there'll be a lot of good networking experience for people there too. So if you're in the LA area or in the SoCal area, I used to call it op area because I was in the Navy. But if you're in the SoCal area, then reach out and go do that if you want to. Is there there's certification attached to this, right?
There is. There's the GCCC, which is the GIAC Critical Control Certification. So,
okay, cool.
Right on. And come join me. I'd love to have you. I'd love to see people.
Right on. All right, Mr. Ventura, if people wanted to get a hold of you outside of the podcast, is there a method by which they could do so?
Well, there's email, and I do have a Twitter account, though I don't post much. And then LinkedIn, I have my profile on LinkedIn. So Twitter, I am Brian with an I, which is BrianWifAneye.
That's right.
For I.
That's right.
Brian with an I.
Brian with an I. I remember that now. Okay.
Yeah, I actually had somebody put on my cube. My old boss used to be Brian with a Y, and so they put on my cube a picture of an eyeball, and they put a BR before the eyeball, and then an AN after. So I'm Brian with an I.
Nice.
So I had to spell it a little weird, but that's me on Twitter, and my email address is water@bighead.org.
Okay.
And people can email me. I'm eager to talk about the security and soccer. I'm a big Portland Timbers fan, so I can talk about soccer and all that good stuff.
This is America, sir. We don't follow.
Yeah.
This.
We don't follow that kind of football. We have this other kind of football.
Yeah, we're Americans here, So no, that's cool. I love me some beautiful games. So that's if you had more time up here in Seattle, we would definitely sit down and have an adult beverage or something. But
yeah.
All
right.
Anyway, so
Mr. If you ever want to talk about the critical security controls again, I could come back if you choose.
No, absolutely. We probably should do that, and it would make more sense if we tackled them more than 2 or 3 at a time. So that would be good. So, Mr. Betcher, if people wanted to get a hold of you because you're jet setting and setting the jet there at DEF CON and Black Hat and all those, how would they get a hold of you?
At Betcher Pwned. BOETTCHERPWNED.
And that's on the Twitters, yeah. And so when you're at Black Hat this week, will you be posting where you're located and doing all that stuff?
I will.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. So the official Breaking Down Security podcast Twitter is at BreakSec. You can follow us there, BRAKESEC. You can follow me. I'm on Twitter as well, at Brian Brake. That's with a Y, BRAKE, BRYAN, BRAKE. We're pretty much everywhere, I think. iTunes, we're on the Google Play Store. We have an RSS feed if you, I like to use Dogcatcher on my Android phone. iTunes has a, great RSS function. We love our Patreon supporters because they help me pay for things. They allow me to, pay for the cost of Libsyn and things. If you found value in our podcast this week, if you want to leave some in the tip jar, you can go over there and support us on Patreon. Tons of show note links in our show notes to the various places we're at. We're in the TuneIn Radio app. We're on player.fm. We're on SoundCloud if you like the SoundCloud thing as well. So, Mr. Ventura, thank you for joining us. When we do these interviews, I never know how these things are going to turn out. We always try to strive for 30 minutes, but you were a very interesting guest, and we appreciate you coming on and giving your point of view for how DFIR works in your world, and a greater enlightenment for the rest of us out there that don't do it on a regular basis.
Well, thank you for having me, and I love listening to you guys, so I really appreciate you having me on here and giving me a chance to talk to you about it.
Oh, that's sweet. Checks in the mail, dude. Checks in the mail. Yeah, right on. So, Mr. Betcher, safe travels back, of course. We recorded this, of course, before you went to Black Hat and DEF CON and B-Sides, and so hope you...
Yeah. I'm already back.
I know. Apparently. Well, we appreciate you putting your neck out there and going to Vegas in 145 degree weather, 70, 80 C out there. So, all right. Well, that was it for this week's Breaking Down Security. Hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.